Well, I was diagnosed with bipolar type 1, or manic depression as it was, in 1993. And it all happened rather dramatically. I was in my final year of school and I started to get happier and happier and happier and more elated and think more wonderful things about myself. Now people who know me may think that's just normal for me, but it was a bit abnormal because I was in my final year of school and I went home and all my friends were revising for their exams and I thought, no, I'm a genius. I don't need to revise, I'll just get straight A's no matter what. So I didn't open a single textbook the whole of the Easter holidays, and I came back feeling even better than usual, you know. And I remember at the time my parents were really happy that I was so happy. Not many parents complain about having a really happy teenager in the house, so you know, you've got to be a bit aware of that. But I came back and suddenly I realised I've got 3 days till my exams and I haven't opened a textbook. And then this wonderful, blissful, sort of these feelings of just sort of euphoria, mania that have been building over the last few weeks, they just vanished and they were replaced with very, very aggressive, paranoid, fearsome thoughts. And this was the first time when I started to notice, well, something's wrong. But what's so interesting is often when the illness arrives, we don't necessarily notice it. You know, we don't have any way to contextualize what's happening. And this seems to be even more apparent in mental illness. You know, because what is the difference between having a bad day or having a bad couple of days and moving into depression? What is the difference between getting a promotion at work, falling in love, feeling great about yourselves, and then just quietly moving into euphoria? So anyway, the long story short is I started becoming really agitated, really rude, really mean to my friends, stressed out. I started using hypnotism tapes to try and remember things as quickly as I could. I went from exam to exam to exam to exam, getting more and more stressed out. And then when my exams were over, I could have just gone home, and what I normally did, like home was always my haven. Like I was very lucky, I was brought up in the countryside in Scotland, and it's beautiful and it's relaxed, and we had dogs, and I would spend most of my time outside actually. But I couldn't relax. I was at home in this loving, friendly environment, my mum cooking me food, my parents around, you know, a very nice place to be. But my mind was just going and going and going, and I was getting more and more crazy by the moment. I've talked about two states of what are basically mania so far. There was this euphoric mania, which was a lovely experience, and then it went into what I call in the book an agitated mania, which was much more about paranoia and fear and worrying about things that you don't necessarily need to worry about, or worrying about them incessantly, you know, not being able to relax. And so then what happened was I started moving into an experience which is called psychosis. Now psychosis is a bit different to mania, because psychosis is when your attachment to reality completely changes. So you start to live in a world that's totally different to the world of everyone else around you. And that's often, for any of you who've experienced psychosis or have been around with people in psychosis, one of the most obvious and intimidating things about it is they're not in the same world. You know, as human beings, we love to share the same world. If we meet someone and we share similar values with them, we often feel close to them. Even just being in a library and knowing we're in a library, you know, we share something together. But when I was in psychosis, I wasn't in a library. I was in a police cell, and all of you guys were undercover police trying to trick me into confessing a crime I didn't commit, so that I would go to prison for the rest of my life. And the strange thing about it is that was my reality, in the same way as your reality is watching a guy talk about mental illness. And so that's it's a challenging thing to experience, and it's also challenging for the people around the person experiencing it. So anyway, long story short, I won't go into too many of the stories because I want to read you a little bit from my book now and again to give you a taste for it. So when I wrote my book, Befriending Bipolar, it was a really cool opportunity to just write about bipolar as I had experienced it. It's not, I'm not qualified in mental health, but I have my own experience and I have my own interpretation of the illness as I experience it. And over the years, that's becoming more and more useful, and more psychologists and psychiatrists and people with bipolar and their families are interested in that. So that's kind of cool. So in my book, I decided to split psychosis into two different types. I've split them into thought-based psychoses, which is psychoses where basically we're believing a voice in our head that creates a different reality for us, but we still see the same reality as everyone else. And then at times I experience total psychosis, which is when the whole world changes. So you guys your eyes could start glowing and you could all become dragons, and you could fly away. So it's living in a totally different universe. So I want to read a little bit about total psychosis from the book, just to give you a sort of taste of it. A total psychosis not only alters what I believe, but what I see, hear, touch, and smell too. The hallucinations mean I don't merely interpret the world differently, I see entirely different worlds. For me, the beginning of a total psychosis is characterized by fear. It isn't a sporadic fear that pops up from time to time, but an ongoing underlying anxiety that builds and builds and builds. Then I begin to catch sight of objects in the corner of my eye that aren't there. I might catch sight of a bird flying past, but think it is a person throwing a rock at my head. As the psychosis continues, I develop full-blown hallucinations. People's eyes shine brightly, their skin becomes green, and their friendly smiles strike fear into my heart. My mind becomes dominated by thoughts of vampires or werewolves, and the appearance of the world itself begins to change before my eyes. A day or two later, people transform into evil reptiles right in front of me. I once walked into a cafe in Bislett and had a conversation with two ghosts who lived there. One was a disfigured pirate with a peg leg and a gruesome pink scar across his throat. The other was half bird, half man, who moved unimaginably slowly because he was hundreds of years old. They were both dead, but they didn't know it. Neither of them existed, but I didn't know it. Psychotic worlds don't obey the rules of natural law. Anything can happen inside them. I once experienced life as a half-starved Special Forces sniper in Vietnam who had been held captive in a bamboo hut for months on end. I felt hunger in my stomach and the heat of the jungle on my skin. But in reality, I was in Oslo in the middle of winter. I then jumped into a life as an inmate in a futuristic prison. My wrists were manacled in front of me with electric handcuffs. So I wandered around my flat, unable to pull my hands apart. My wife cottoned on to what had happened and unlocked my handcuffs with an imaginary key. It worked. I was able to use my hands again. So that's a little taste of what it's like to experience a total psychosis. So about 6 months after I'd started to go manic and then I'd done my exams and then I tried to relax, I ended up coming home from a holiday that I'd gone on with some friends, and I was in total psychosis. I thought that I had raped a girl at a swimming pool. I thought that the police had built an entire hospital to try and capture me and get me to confess. So when I was actually put into a mental hospital in Edinburgh, I wouldn't speak to anyone for 2 or 3 days because I thought if I say anything, they're going to just lock me up and throw away the key. And this was an interesting theme with a lot of my psychoses, was that right at the beginning of the psychosis, something would happen that would swear me to secrecy. So rather than tell people what was going on, or even just express things so that they could start to tell what was going on, I kept completely quiet and just suffered in silence. And a lot of people I've spoken to with bipolar have had the same experience. This is something that is so strange about bipolar, is that there seem to be almost archetypical experiences that people have. I think it's the same in schizophrenia, I think it's the same in paranoia as well, that there are certain themes that we somehow plug into, that we experience. For a lot of people, those can be aliens, they can be strange reptilian creatures, they can be the legends of King Arthur and the Maids of Avalon. They can be these kind of almost archetypal elements of society that we somehow relate to on a subconscious level. And in many ways, experiencing a psychosis is really just when the subconscious is going running completely wild. And it's almost like anything can happen. So the good news. The good news is that when I was given antipsychotics and when I went into the Royal Edinburgh Mental Hospital, I started to get better, thank goodness. I was really lucky because, and this is 30 years ago, but mental hospitals in the UK 30 years ago weren't particularly friendly places. You know, they were quite tough places. A lot of the people in there should have been in prison, but they were put into the mental hospitals because there was no space and because they were struggling mentally, you know. And I was a 17-year-old, and I was tiny as a 17-year-old, and it was terrifying, you know, to be ill and then to go into this environment. But luckily, my mum wouldn't have any of it, and they wanted to keep me in the Royal Edinburgh in this ward called Ward 2, which was full of about 30 people who were really struggling, and some were quite violent, and a lot of them were drunk, and a lot of them were using drugs. And she just said, he can't stay here, he cannot stay here. That when a mum decides something, it's quite hard for anyone to oppose it, even if they're a psychiatrist trying to take in their child for assessment. If the mum says, no, this ain't happening. And luckily, the psychiatrist did back down, and the next day, they got me into a much quieter ward. So I was very lucky in that respect. That was when I started to have my first experiences with psychiatric medication. Now, psychiatric medication is a double-edged sword. And in the book, I'm not anti-psychiatric medication. I'm not pro-psychiatric medication. I'm a great believer that with the help of professionals, people have to figure out their own path. Because for some people, the side effects of psychiatric medication are really quite small, and they can live a good life on it. And then for other people, the side effects are almost worse than the illness. And basically, it seems that mental illness for most people it's a journey. It's not something that we just master, you know. One of the things I talk about quite a lot in the book is that there isn't a formula to deal with mental illness. There isn't like a missing key that can cure everyone that we haven't quite discovered yet, you know. There isn't necessarily a perfect dose of a perfect drug that just solves all our problems. It seems that mental illness, it either becomes something we become very bitter about and very upset about, and we identify with a lot of negatives around it, or it becomes an opportunity to learn and to grow. And that seems very much up to the individual and how they choose to see it. And again, it's not something, I don't think there's a right and a wrong way to see it. I think if someone can be philosophical about it, it's a huge bonus for them and for the people around them. But I also don't think people can be forced to see anything a certain way. You know, that's just not being human. We all have to go through our own journey, you know, with whatever it is. So it was pretty obvious that I was psychotic after 2 or 3 days when I actually started talking to them and learning on what was going on. And so they gave me antipsychotics, but they gave me quite a heavy dose of them because they saw how ill I was. And the antipsychotics, they worked really well. They started taking me out of the psychosis really quickly, but they also drove me down into a depression. And this was like a drug-induced depression. It was probably the worst experience I've had in my life. And I'm going to read you a little bit about serious depression. Not hopefully to depress you. Everything else I'm going to read after this is a bit more uplifting, but just to give you a feel for it, you know, if you haven't experienced it yourself. Yeah, so in the book I split depression into 3 types, mild, moderate and severe. And this is severe depression as I experienced it. Hell doesn't exist as some far-off place where sinners go when they die. Hell exists between our ears and is created by the thoughts and feelings in our mind. When I experienced severe depression, I was both mentally ravaged and physically debilitated too. Never before had I been broadsided by my fingers in this way. I had experienced fear and anxiety. I'd been angry and jealous and sad. But now these simple emotions were magnified 1,000-fold. Depression, fear, panic, guilt, and a dark sense of shame smothered me in an excruciating blanket of desperation and self-hatred. All the flavours of every negative emotion I'd ever experienced were bundled into one ghastly sack, thrown over my head and tied tightly around my neck, choking the life out of me. It was a state of endless abandonment and all-encompassing despair. My entire life became an unyielding agony with no hope of relief. The world had no colour, no taste, no smell, no warmth, no love, no friendliness, no hope, no future, no life. I was so bereft of joy, connection and pleasure, I would have welcomed death had I been able to imagine it. However, the relief of death was not offered to me. Nothing was offered other than continuous, agonising torment. Right, that is the last part of depression that I'm going to talk about, because I don't want to send you all off feeling mildly depressed. And one thing I've tried to do since I kind of got more of a grip on bipolar, and since I've been stable now for 9 years. I haven't been in mental hospital for 9 years, and I haven't needed to take antipsychotics or antidepressants for, I think, about 7 years now. So things are good, touch wood. But one of the things I wanted to talk about was, what good can we get from mental illness? You know, we've got loads of stories about people having a hard time, and I've just read to you then about experiencing depression. But what good can come from it? You know? Because I'm a great believer that the experiences that happen to us in life, they happen for a reason. And sometimes we know what that reason is, and sometimes we hope there's a reason, you know, and maybe it reveals itself years on. But I'm a firm believer that one of the reasons we get born a human being, which is not the easiest thing to be born. I think there are much easier things to be born than a human being. But one of the reasons we're born a human being is so that we face challenges, and hopefully we grow from those challenges. I would say long term we always grow from the challenges, but hopefully we become aware that we can grow as people, that we can develop. And so mental illness it's actually given me a lot of good things. I've got a few of them written down, but I'm trying not to use my notes because I think it's more fun just to talk and see what comes out, you know. So apologies if the structure is like woo all over the place, but hey, I got a mental illness, it's not my fault. But yeah, one of the things that I see about life is like, almost all of us have expectations of life, and almost always at some point they're smashed, you know? I mean, how many people can remember being like a little girl or a young boy thinking about the wonderful person you're going to marry, the amazing things you're going to do, the superpowers you're going to have, you know, whatever it is. And then you get to 25, to 30, to 55, whatever it is, and you're like, shit, life's a bit different, isn't it? And there's good things and there's bad things in life, but it can feel like life is against us. But it only feels like it's against us when we actually choose to look at it that way. When we choose to identify an individual me who's struggling against the unfairness of the world. But if we just change that perspective slightly, and we look at why is this happening for me rather than to me, it's just a little word, then we can start to get more of a perspective on life. And we can start to talk about our challenges from a perspective of, what can I learn from this? How can I move beyond this? How can I learn from this so I can avoid it in the future? And that's a completely different approach to, why is this happening to me? It's so unfair. This doesn't happen to other people. God, nothing that I've been promised ever comes, you know? It's a tiny shift, but it's a huge shift, you know? And it turns life into a teacher rather than a punisher, you know? Which I always thought that life was quite a punishing life, you know, at the start. I thought that when bad things happened, it was totally unfair, and I either had to deny it, or I had to just get on with things, or I had to get angry and bitter about it. But bipolar didn't allow me to do that, because the suffering was so great that it's like it put me in a corner, and it's almost like it made me grow up, you know? And that's something that I'm sure a lot of people have experienced in this room, that you've gone through a challenge and you would never want to go through that challenge again. It could have been mental illness, it could have been divorce, it could have been health, someone close to you could have died. You never want to go through that again, but you go through it and you end up a stronger, more compassionate person. And when you're a stronger and more compassionate person, you give so much more to the world. Rather than being someone who spreads anger and bitterness and a bit of hatred here and there, you're someone who spreads wisdom and love and kindness and laughter. Because that's one thing that you see with a lot of people who've experienced serious challenges in their life, is they laugh about things. And they laugh about very inappropriate things too. You know? I've always had to laugh at the whole sort of political correctness movement when it was very strong. Luckily it isn't now, thank goodness, because I'm not very good at saying the right thing. But I always used to laugh at that movement because it was full of people who had not experienced life. And they thought they could somehow make someone else's life better by saying a word slightly differently. And I'm like, no, you've never suffered. If you've suffered, you don't give a shit how anyone says something. You just want your suffering to stop, you know. And quite honestly, if you can find someone who will laugh at you and pull you along and cheer you up, that's a massive bonus. And those things don't happen in the politically correct world, because it's so serious and it takes everyone's illnesses and problems so seriously. And for a moment that might feel nice, but it makes everything worse. We do not want people taking our problems too seriously, because we already take them way seriously enough, you know? Of course, sometimes we need a kind, listening ear. Of course we need that. And of course, sometimes we need people to take it seriously, you know, meet us where we're at. But when we want to come on the way up, we want people to say, look, I know you've had a tough time, but look to the future. There's so much for you, you know, there's so many opportunities. Look what you've become, look what you've learned, you know. We need that side of life to be presented. Because human beings do not do well when we're taking ourselves too seriously. And if that's one thing I've learned from bipolar, it's that the version of me that takes myself too seriously is really boring. And no one likes to be around it. And it just drags everything down. But the version of me who can be kind and do what I need to do to look after myself, you know, I'm still very much responsible for my life. I'm responsible for things. But to not take myself too seriously is like, oh, thank God for that, you know? It's such a bonus. Well, pretty big effect. One of the strange things about mental illness is that when you've been mentally ill for a while and medicated and, you know, yeah, you're not sure what's you and what's the illness, you know, which is quite confusing sometimes. I would say when I was ill, the effects on the people around me, my wife, my family, really negative. You know, it puts people under an enormous pressure. And I was lucky enough to have family and some friends who wanted to help me and kind of stuck around. And when I'm depressed, I have an amazing ability to just drag people down and always see the worst. It's almost like all of my Galweg and Scarpa, when I'm well, get turned into just dragging everything down. That's tough. So I personally think it's really important for friends and family to help and to show their love and support, but also they have to look after themselves too. You know, it's a balance, I think, that we learn over time. As far as my career is concerned, my career's probably suffered more than anything, actually. I haven't really had a career that I thought I was going to have. In 1998, I got a job as a trader in a company called Merrill Lynch in London and New York. So it was a real high-flying job, loads of money, loads of stress. Since then, I've read that a lot of people with bipolar, they find completely inappropriate jobs because they're kind of drawn to that energy. I did that for 3 years. I hated it. It didn't work, and I ended up leaving, depressed, you know. And since then, I haven't had like a proper career, but what I have done is I got into meditation, and I became like a monk who teaches meditation, and that has kind of been my career, as well as writing books. But it hasn't been a career in that I haven't made much money on it at all. You know, you're talking a few thousand kroner every year for many years, and just grabbing work when I can, when I'm able to work. So it's had an enormous negative effect on my career, yet, and this is the cool part, my career now as an advocate for bipolar and speaking with personal experience, that started to take off more and more in the last 4 or 5 years. I've written some books, I'm on a lot of podcasts, so it's kind of cool to see that by learning to accept bipolar more and learning to see it for what it is rather than be really emotionally attached to it, which I was, that's now opening up for me to contribute. And alongside that, also, bipolar can be incredibly beneficial for relationships, because often people with bipolar, they do have something different about them. They have a charisma, they have an interest in life, often they have a positivity actually, that people like and they like to be around and that other people can feed off. And sometimes it's something that other people really need in their life. It's an X factor, and they really benefit from having those people around them. But I guess what it ultimately comes down to is how well can the person with bipolar be, how well can they stay, and how mature are they as a person? Because in order to contribute to relationships for anyone, whether they've got a mental illness or not, we need those things. You know, if someone is a very immature soul, if they're full of anger or drama or chaos, they destroy relationships left, right and centre. If someone is more full of love, more full of kindness, more humoristic, whatever, they tend to nourish relationships. So I guess what I would say finally is that bipolar exaggerates those features. No one's had the perfect life, not even close, you know. Are we going to turn that to our advantage, or are we going to be sad about it for the rest of our lives, you know? And that's kind of our choice.
Could I say something?
Yes, this is my wife, she wants to say something.
Yes, hello everyone. I think really has made it possible to have such a good relationship that we have, despite the illness, is that you're very aware of that you have the illness, you know, and you're willing to take responsibility for it when you're not obviously struggling a lot, then that's it. When you're struggling a lot, then it's my job to know that this is the illness. You know, this is the illness I'm dealing with and not really my husband anymore. And that's challenging, it's not easy. But I learned that over the years, that to recognize that and to know that this is just something that has such a strong power that you don't really have a choice in that moment. But what you've done that's really saved the day very often is that, you know, when you come out of it, you know that you need to take responsibility for it and to apologize, basically. And that's been incredibly important, because you know that it's been tough for me too, you know. And I think you had to go through this acceptance and accept that it's shameful as well sometimes to experience losing your mind, you know, or being like a victim of these quite extreme moods, you know, and that you don't have control always. And I think when you actually accepted that and didn't sort of try to run away from the responsibility, that's when you were able to actually see my side and our son's side, and to apologize, and that's been very important.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a particularly stressful life. I think getting into meditation and teaching meditation and writing books and being lucky to have a wife who's willing to support me, you know, when I'm not making much money, and from getting help from NAV as well. it's allowed me to make choices that I don't have to have a super stressful life. If I was born in another country, like if I was in the Second World or even parts of Europe, it would be much harder to have bipolar. So I think over the years, my life has just become slower and slower. I didn't deliberately choose it. I think now I would, if I knew, I would make choices that support me. But it's not always easy to make those choices, because sometimes we have to earn money, or sometimes we feel that we have to do certain things. So I personally think it's a journey, and I think with professional help, with someone nice that you can chat to, you can kind of figure things out, and over time you'll get better and better at creating a life that supports you. That's what I think. That is the age-old question about psychiatric care and psychiatric medication. Just to repeat, I can't give advice on any of this, and I'm not going to give advice because I'm not trained. But what I will say is that there's more and more research into forms of treatment that either require less medication and occasionally no medication, depending on the individual. The two that are most obvious in bipolar, the ketogenic diet is starting to get a lot of attention. Literally just the last couple of years. I actually took part in a study that Edinburgh and Glasgow University ran, and keto helps me a lot. Makes me a lot calmer, makes my brain work better, and I need less medication, me personally. Doesn't necessarily mean everyone who does it will need less medication. That's something that people have to figure out with their psychiatrist, their therapist, For other types of mental illness, not bipolar, this one, psychedelics is showing a lot of hope for a lot of people with treatment-resistant depression and PTSD, and also alcoholism, which is very interesting. Again, there's been a lot of money, private money, poured into that recently in the last 5 or 6 years, and some very, very good research done on it. My own experience is that as much as all of us would love to have the answer to mental illness, we'd love to say, yes, you need medication, you need this amount, it's not going to give you side effects, and that will work, or no, you don't need medication, it's going to be fine with this and that and that. It's a messy thing, mental illness, and it seems that most people, they have to have their journey with it. Now, there are a couple of approaches that everyone can take that will make that journey easier, that I've experienced, and this is something that I can share, from what I've seen. And that is that as best as people can, they can try and befriend their illness. Now, when I say befriend it, I don't mean be best buddies and go out for a beer with it. What I mean is that over time is learn to accept it. And the reason why it's worth learning to accept what some say is the unacceptable, the reason why it's worth doing that is because whenever we accept any situation in our life, we have more clarity with how to deal with it. It's like we take a step back from it. We let go of a lot of the emotion, a lot of the disappointment, a lot of the anger about this thing. And when I started to accept bipolar, genuinely accept it, solutions turned up that helped me that I would either have ignored beforehand, or perhaps they wouldn't even have arrived. It was almost like my acceptance started to attract them. Long story short, I woke up one morning and I'd been ill for 5 years. I've been in and out of depression and psychosis for 5 years, trying to come off my medication because the side effects were so bad. I'd ended up going into Dr. Husvai, which is an amazing hospital in Bærum, amazing hospital, amazing people there. God, that's a lifesaver. I went there. They did the coolest thing that anyone has done with me by that stage. They gave me space. They didn't do what happened a lot in Britain and happened with my earlier psychologists and psychiatrists, which was to just try and get me on medication as quickly as possible because they were afraid of the illness. That happens a lot in mental illness. They said, look, we know that lithium's been tough on you, and we know that you're trying to find solutions, and we respect that. And so 2 weeks of just being in there, being looked after, but with no pressure. And I actually went to them and I said, I think I need to go back on lithium. And that was the sort of start of my acceptance. And then when I really accepted that lithium allowed me to be happy, it wasn't good for my body. It isn't good for my body. I'm still on it. But it allowed me to be happy, and happiness was the most important thing by then. You know, when you've got a mental illness, happiness is even more important, you know. I accepted that I'm on this drug, I'm happy, and then things started changing my life that started supporting me on a lower level of the drug, so the side effects were not as bad. So if one can accept a mental illness, and again, you can't force yourself to do this, that's so important. You can't sit yourself saying, well, he accepted it, so I'm going to, or I should accept it, and I feel bad that I don't. Try not to think like that. Acceptance is something that comes from within you at the right time. I don't think it's something anyone can force. But when it does come, it then allows the individual to communicate better with their psychiatrist, to be more patient with their doctor. Perhaps they need to be patient. You know, perhaps they don't even like their doctor. Or perhaps it gives them the clarity to change doctor. You know, who knows what happens. But by having that approach, and by having that approach to life, it makes everything easier. Yeah, thanks for your question.
Men da vil jeg bare takke deg for et fantastisk involvert og engasjert foredrag. Og du har en fantastisk stemme, og jeg skal gi mine beste anbefalinger. Ja, tusen takk, Oliver.
Takk.